was definitely very excited for it, but there was full attention. You know, guys were locked in, they were engaged, they were ready to go. We had everybody there, and I think it was definitely exactly the way that we wanted to come off as a coaching staff. And really right now, Jim, it's about building relationships with these guys. We got a chance within the framework of offense, defense, and special teams to just kind of get the general things. You know, offensively, we're talking about our style of play, our approach, and then we're introducing formations and motions and personnel groupings to the skill players. So it's very early in the process. We've got some time right now, so we want to make sure we do a great job establishing a foundation so that it can be conducive for that long-term success. But I think today went as well as we could have hoped, and looking forward to tomorrow already.
What was kind of the crux of your message when you addressed the team? How much time did you spend kind of thinking about what you were going to say in that verse?
Yeah, I think it's really important, like we talked about, establishing our identity. And we've sat down as a coaching staff, as an organization, and really going back to the interview process, talking about what we felt like was going to be conducive for having a long-term vision for our players and what was going to help us have that sustained success over time. And it's about establishing our identity. And you see the T-shirts that people are walking around with the "We, not me." It's always going to be about the team, and all the decisions that we want to make are going to be what's, from a standpoint of what's in the best interest of the team before any personal agendas, and that's what we want to embody as a coaching staff and with our players as well.
Were those T-shirts your idea?
It was a collective idea, the "we, not me" approach out, and it was our idea.
Just to clarify, I think you said everybody was here. You had the whole team here today.
We did. Everybody was accounted for, and as far as I know, and it was the turnout that we expected. I think the players felt as excited as we were as a coaching staff. So, getting that feeling from those guys is exactly what we were hoping for, and that's what we got.
Coach, with all the excitement that you have, how do you keep from trying to go too fast, too soon when you want to? I know the pace that you want to make it even and very slow getting in, but sometimes you can want to do too much too fast.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think it's important for you to kind of just lay out a foundation, have a long-term vision in terms of we know that we've got 10 weeks with this off-season program. And we've laid out the first 2 weeks knowing that, today we had an hour and a half with the meetings, and then for the next 3 days this week we'll have an hour and 40 minutes. So I think it's very important for us within the framework of each position to allocate that time accordingly. But if we have that foundation built, then it can kind of allow us to stay on track. And for me, the excitement is something where you get excited to come in here and really getting these players in here, you feel like a coach again. And we've all been chomping at the bit, and I think I share the same feeling as our entire coaching staff that, it's nice to feel like a coach again, get these guys in here and get into the meeting room, and then really phase 2 will represent getting to be on the grass with them and start to teach and work some drill works on the field.
Sean, did you get a chance to meet with Jared specifically, or the quarterbacks specifically, to go over this offense?
We've had little conversations here and there. Today really represents that first time where you're meeting. It was all kind of skill-based. We were together the entire time with our quarterbacks, tight ends, receivers, and our running backs. But once we get further into it, then we will start to have some more individual time. And I think those times are great opportunities for Matt and Greg to continue to get to know those guys. You want to be able to allow your coaches to coach, empower those assistants. And I think when we start to have that individual time allocated to the meetings, that's when the position coaches can get their things going.
How much of a feel do you think Jared has for your offense right now? How much work is ahead of him?
Yeah, I think for our quarterbacks as a whole, there's a lot of work, but it's just making sure that we have that one-day approach. If you look at it where you want to go from A to Z, then you end up getting overwhelmed with the amount of information. But I think as long as you kind of just take little steps at a time, that continuous improvement one day at a time, then I feel like that'll lead to the things that we want. But we're just focused on making sure that these guys have a good ownership, and we're trying to get these guys ultimately to be an extension of our coaching staff. And it's going to be a process. We've got to be patient and committed to it. But I think, with the demeanor and the disposition that I sense from really all 3 of our quarterbacks, we feel good about that happening.
Sean, you bring in Nikel last week. Does that increase the likelihood that LaMarcus might move to safety?
Well, I think when you look at it, just evaluating the tape, you flip the tape on, you watch LaMarcus Joyner. This guy's a football player. He shows up, and you want to find as many ways to get him on the field as possible. And whether that's him at nickel, which I think he's one of the elite players at that spot in this league, or the safety. I think you see an instinctual player that has a great feel for the game, and I think our coaching staff's done a nice job kind of targeting him as a player that we've got to make sure that he's on the grass, he's competing. And any time that you add depth like a Nikel Roby does add, where he's played a lot of football, it gives you some versatility to move a special player like LaMarcus around potentially.
Sean, you have a lot of speed at your disposal in the receiving corps in Washington. In terms of what you have here, how much of a premium do you put on that, just having receivers that can blow past guys to make your offense run?
Oh, it's extremely important. You know, I think one of the things you felt fortunate looking at some of the receivers they have in Washington, guys that could take the top off of coverage. And when you're trying to operate with some of your play action game where you've got your 3-level throws, the top shelf, the intermediate, and then kind of that flare control underneath, you know, somebody that can stretch the field vertical, and if a team isn't honoring it, then you make them pay with those big plays. But you know, the offenses that I've been fortunate to be a part of, we have done a nice job creating explosives, and that's definitely something that we're looking to do here, and those speed guys gives you the best opportunity to be able to do that.
What kind of an adjustment do you think it would be for LaMarcus? I know you played that a little bit in college, but
You know, I think it will be an adjustment. I think our coaching staff's done a nice job kind of figuring out ways we can make that transition smooth, but you know, there are some different exit angles when you are talking about playing a deep half or the middle of the field. But I think from an underneath defender, you know, he's been doing things like that. You know, a lot of those things that you ask a down safety when you're playing in your single high defenses to do are very similar to what he's done the last couple years from that nickel spot. But I think it's just getting comfortable. He is an instinctual player, and just understanding some of those exit angles, some of those break points based on, you know, starting from 15 yards off as opposed to down where you're within that 10-yard. When you're 10 yards within the line of scrimmage will be a little bit different. But I think you've seen examples of great guys be able to do both across this league, and we're hoping that he'll be able to do the same thing for us.
Are there other guys you anticipate having to sort of make a shift like that in terms of their position, just given the changes that are happening, like, say, at Robert Quinn, you know, going from the 4-3 to 3-4?
Yeah, you know, I think when you really look at it 3-4 to 4-3, you know, with Coach Phillips' system, like we've kind of talked about a little bit, they are a one-gap penetrating front. For all intents and purposes, Robert will line up as the will linebacker, but he's a rush player. He'll play a similar role to what DeMarcus Ware did in Denver for Wade the last couple years, and I think he's going to still be. You know, he's been an elite rusher in this league for years, and that's what we're hoping to do with him moving forward. I don't think his role will change too much. I think you look at some of the additions that we made on the offensive line with Andrew Whitworth. We'll shuffle some guys around and then bring in a veteran with John Sullivan in. I think it'll allow us to be able to move some guys around, get a feel to see if this is a position that they're a little bit more comfortable with, and it'll ultimately make us better as a unit up front. But defensively, I think LaMarcus is probably the best example of the guy that'll have to do that transition. Other than that, we feel good about where the guys are at and the personnel we have on defense.
we got about Greg Robinson at right tackle before. What about Rob Havenstein and maybe if he moves to right guard?
Yeah, you know, I think when he was coming out, he looked at Rob as a potential guy to be able to move inside and do some of those things. And really going back 2 years, I thought he's put some excellent tape out there as far as playing that right tackle position. But you talk to people that have been around him, you know, we've got Andy Dickerson who will be working with our offensive line again this year. Him being able to communicate what a sharp guy Rob is, how he's able to process things above the neck. I think he and Greg working in coordination and you know, in unison will be able to help both of those guys. And then you add John Sullivan to the mix. I know from being with him in Washington, he did a great job communicating, has a really impressive big picture understanding from that center spot. And then, you know, looking at Raj at left guard and Whitworth at left tackle, and then you see good things out of Jamon Brown. So I think we've got some good depth up front, and excited to see how these guys process that information and then translate it to the grass once we get the OTA started in Phase 3.
I know you had John Washington last year. I know he didn't play that much, but how healthy was he? Do you feel like those back issues were kind of behind us?
Yeah, that's what we're hoping. You know, I didn't notice. Yeah, back issues behind him, huh? That's pretty funny. So, anyways, when you really look at it, you know, if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't have known that he had any back issues. I think he's put great tape throughout the course of his career on film. And when he played for us last year, it was 130 or so snaps. I thought he did an excellent job. And you really can't undervalue or underappreciate that communication from that center spot. Handling the cadence, handling the calls up front, because it all starts with that spot. Most of our calls fit off of that. But John was a guy that I was really impressed with being around him in Washington. You almost felt like you were talking to a coach. You know, you talk about your quarterback wanting to be an extension of the coaching staff. The center position is very similar, where he's got to have a big picture ownership of what we're trying to get done, what we're trying to accomplish up front. And John's certainly someone that shows that he's capable of handling that.
Coach, one of the big adjustments the players will have to make is terminology. So is there or will there be any give and take as far as terminology is concerned? Because sometimes they're used to something for so many years.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think when you really look at it from our systems, what's very important, we'll talk about our language that we'll use now. And I think it does help to have an understanding of what maybe something was called prior to this to kind of help with that communication. But we are going to utilize Coach Phillips' system with the defensive terminology, and then we've kind of collaborated with some of the coaches that we have offensively. And then you also try to make sure that when you're teaching it, does this make sense? You get a chance to really go back and evaluate some of the terminology that we might have used in Washington and how maybe we can make a couple tweaks from a starting point. If you know nothing, this at least makes sense from a teaching progression. So that's something that we want to be aware of, that we will do. And then when you look at what Bones will do, that'll be very similar. I think the success that they've had on special teams is something that we feel good about. And now the challenge is, can we take it to the next level for those guys? But that's kind of how we'll approach that. But I think you always want to just make sure that from a teaching progression, your words mean something so that it can resonate and stick with the players.
Sean, a couple players mentioned accountability as one of the things that you emphasized in the team meeting. Why was that important for you to emphasize today?
Well, I think any time that you're really just looking at football as a whole, I think it's very important for each player, each coach to be accountable, take full responsibility for our performance, for your actions, no excuses, no complaining. And, we're looking for mentally tough players, mentally tough coaches that you take accountability, you take full responsibility for whatever was done. And if it's something that we need to get corrected and fixed, we all do that and we move forward and we don't blink. But that was kind of how we implemented the accountability process and why that's so important for us moving forward.
All right.
Okay? Thanks, guys. Yeah. There you go. That was our idea for the T-shirt. Thanks, guys. You guys good? Oh, you want to see?
Get away from the mic. Yeah, there we go.